nice. That's one of those books like you feel like you're doing it, like reinforces what you're doing and what you've done and how I view business. For me anyways, personally, I do some of this. I was like, I'm so great. But no, like, you're like, oh, that makes so much sense. And like, you don't always know why you do things or where they come from. But like, I think myself with our gym and my partner and life partner and business partner, like he's got a very, low stress way of looking at business, and we don't get like caught up in little shit things that don't matter and the petty stuff. So this, I was like, oh yeah, there's no competition. I've never had that mentality. Even when people come and join, I'm like, cool, if you don't want to be here, that's fine, but let's find something that keeps you moving and that you enjoy. Like, and so this was like a good reiteration, like, hey, you're on the right path. Not that I was concerned, but I was like, I believe in Simon Sinek. He's a smart man. Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, it's good.
It almost takes the pressure off a little bit too, right? Like I think that when you start to realize, hey, we're never gonna beat or defeat or win against like a lot of the bullshit that we kind of feel like we're up against in the industry. It takes the pressure off that it's like just by being an alternative to all that crap and staying relevant and staying in the space is like winning. You know what I mean? And that kind of what he talks about is like there's, I think he was talking about the war on drugs, right? There's not going to be a definitive moment where it's like policing beats drugs and it's no longer an issue, but it is about staying around and doing what you can to make that as hard as possible for that outcome. And I think that when I read that, I was like, yeah, that is kind of similar to what we're trying to do. And I think that we've kind of not necessarily struggled with like the vision, but like, I don't know what the end game is, you know what I mean? And as you keep propelling forward, it's like different opportunities become available. And we assess a lot of them based on, what we think the brand stands for and what we want it to stand for. And that sort of dictates what opportunities we take advantage of. But just knowing that it, like just staying and moving in general and not getting left behind is kind of, that is the point, right?
I think, Ben, you and I have had some similar conversations around the podcast. And, when we kind of lose our vision, because like you said, there's no end game, or we don't know what the end game necessarily is for the podcast or any of these other initiatives that we're doing. But it's always important to have in the back of your mind, and with every, guest you're having on, or conversation that we're having, that they align with, our ultimate mission for the podcast, right? Or our company as a whole. So I think that that's kind of one way I tied everything together as well, because you always are looking for this, okay, well, what are we working towards? Like, what is this end game? And like you said, sometimes there just isn't one. So I think that was a pretty valuable takeaway. And I'm interested too to hear like how everyone else related this to things outside of business, things like training and just health and nutrition and that sort of thing too. I found some associations with too, so excited to dig into that. But quickly, I'll just do a little intro. So we are sitting down to discuss our third book of the MTMM book club, The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. Did I say that right? Sinek? I think so. So yeah, same crew here again today. I'm really excited to dive into this book and looking forward to hearing people's recommendations for our next pick. So yeah, let's dig right into it. Yeah, I guess I would like to hear if anybody has had any, like thoughts around how this idea and how the author is relating it to business, how that applies to things outside of business and just in general life too.
I feel like it was
a... Go ahead.
There's going to be this awkward silence.
The Zoom fear.
No, you go, Laura, go.
I felt like I dealt with this a little bit when we first went into lockdown. And I know we talked about this a little in the last book club, but that idea of like when there was competitions and there always being kind of like, this is what I'm working towards. When like in reality, I think a lot of people, mine included, like our journey at the gym and stuff is not an end game. Like I'm not realistically, there's not a point where I'm like, oh, I've made it, like I'm healthy. Like it's something that's kind of like always ongoing. And I think reframing that helped me to kind of wrap my head around like what I was doing. And sometimes it's okay to just do things in the gym that are fun because it's not like an end thing, right? Like I'm not going for this like I don't even know what it would be, but like this like medal or trophy or something, like you can just do things and kind of continue going forward towards what you're enjoying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think with having Matea, interesting kind of in terms of like legacy, right? And you think about like, he talks a lot about wanting to create a brand that people want to work for and want to propel forward so that the mission can continue on long after you're gone. And I think about that a lot with like Matea, and it's like, you want her to kind of like bring her up with like, you know, the value system and the ethics that we hold, so that like she can continue on kind of that path, like, you know, almost like as a representative of our like family brand, right? And hopefully that holds her in good stead in the way that she has dealings with other people and things like that in her life. So yeah.
Interesting.
Look, I related it almost 100% back to business all the time, the whole time. But I love what Laura said about, it makes so much sense. You're right. Like, I mean, Ben and I have spoken heaps about like, or I think actually we've all four spoken about it, is like, you know, your goal might be to have a 6-pack, but then you get there and your happiness doesn't really change. So is that the end, you know, is that the finite goal? I don't know, you know, it's not very, it's applicable and maybe achievable, but it's not going to bring you the ultimate quality of life that you really want. So yeah, so outside of training, I literally like didn't even think about relating it to life. Everything just kept going back to like I loved the part about the SEALs, like when he's talking about the Navy SEALs, and you know, they would have rather have people who were like low to medium performing but high trust, you know, which I was like, yes, like I want people like that I, you know I can call on and lean on, and you know, that have my morals and values and that promote like ourselves and the gym. And yeah, for me, everything just came back to business. So I might be a bit of a crap person to talk to, anything outside
You
of
want that
today.
in your personal circle though too, wouldn't you? Surely. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Like, yeah. And that's what I just thought about. I was like, okay, I was like, people in my life that, you know, I would say my circle isn't huge, but the people who are in my, like the majority of my clients are like my closest friends, and you know, things like that, because I didn't grow up here either. So like my business is a bit of my life, and my life kind of revolves around my business, which is, I don't know, a good or bad thing. But yeah, I really loved that part about the book. So I was like, oof, I'm into that. Yeah.
And I think when I was reading it, for the most part, I was thinking back to MTMM, especially we're doing a lot of work currently on reflecting on our mission statements. And that's where I was referring most things back to. But then even just recently, when I was kind of preparing for this call, I was like, like how can we relate this outside of business too, right? Because I feel like a lot of people who may have read this book or are listening to this may not, you know, be leading their own businesses. So I thought that'd be just an interesting kind of avenue to take. One thing I did connect it to was something from Brene Brown's work as well. How she talks a lot about, I think it was in Dare to Lead, talks about understanding your values and making sure that you lead every decision that you make with these values in mind. And I think that really ties into everything that he was talking about too, in terms of business. So I liked that. I liked making that connection.
I don't know if anyone else noticed, but obviously the first book was pretty Brene Brown, but every book that we've read that talks about like community and connection and leadership and team building, they all refer back to Brene Brown's work, right? So if we have like all these different authors that are in like no way connected or related, and they're all kind of referring back to this one like major theme that seems to be this undertone in everything that we're reading, I think there's something in that, right? So I think that it obviously is probably, maybe we understand it a little bit more because this is what we are reading, but I think that it's obviously something that is still not quite breaking through necessarily into like mainstream leadership or like team building practice. And I think that, you know, if on such a small level that we're all kind of identifying how important like Jess said, trust is, right? Even in the Navy SEALs or even in a friendship circle, that it is something that we want to be very aware of, you know, with the decisions that we're making and with the people that we're bringing on, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Do you want to go around and share some favorite quotes, or certain, if we don't have quotes, specific Takeaways from the book. Laura, do you want to start?
Yeah. It was interesting as I'm thinking through it. So I work for like a larger company. So part of, as I was thinking through this, it was like, oh, these are things I'd love to see my like leadership team at work do. And I got like a little bit in this headspace of like, oh, like, why can't they get on the same page, and a little bit of like frustration. And it took me taking a step back to, I think, realize that like, that's outside of my control, right? Like that's not a piece I can worry about, but I have small teams at work. I have projects I work on. And like, I think leading through example a little bit, especially with that trust piece, is like what you can kind of control. So like that Navy SEALs discussion, I particularly liked because I feel like when I'm trying to pick teams at work on projects and stuff like that, like that's a really big consideration, is like, who are these people that I trust? And then how can I continue to build the trust with them on a regular basis? Because I don't want, people to be afraid to bring forth issues or stuff. Like, I don't think that's how you get better. So that whole discussion around continually improving and having the trust to bring forth those, especially connecting to like that safety issue. I can't remember what the exact like Shell station was called, but the fact that building trust had such an increase in productivity and then decrease in like safety instances was just, I think, hammered home that idea of like, as much as I can build trust in like the smaller groups that I work in, that's something that I think I really want to take going forward.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting perspective that you have working for a bigger company that you, like you said, you can't necessarily control how the leaders lead, right? And yeah, just thinking about like how, if that came to like a head or came to like a clash, what sort of things could you do, right? And there's only so much in your control. It's interesting to think about. Like, how can you, like Ben was saying, like we're all reading all of this and we haven't quite seen it kind of leak into the mainstream. But like, how do you make that happen? Like, how do you make that change? If you're like somewhere here and you want to make that change up here, like how does that happen? Something to think about. I don't have the answer, but
Slide in this book, right? Let them listen to it. You're like, here.
Yeah.
Bureaucracy is hard, right? And I think that's kind of the biggest challenge you face, and just the same with you. And as you get bigger and as you grow, how do you stay small, right? And ultimately, like that's something that with MTMM and what we have plans to do and the impact we want to have, like we have to grow in terms of like the amount of staff members that we are. But how do we grow to a point where we still have that like small family vibe? I don't ever want to be in a position where like Mags has a good idea and it takes us 8 months to implement because it has to go through this whole process, because things move so much faster than that. So it is that kind of like building trust, and I guess when you do own the business, making sure that those channels of communication are very easy and very open at all times. And I think that probably, again, my favorite part of the book was when they're talking about that police chief, right, who kind of came in and they have that like one by one policing strategy, where it was more about like getting out into the community and developing relations and trust with the local community as a way of like being able to help enforce, I guess, like their mission in terms of reducing the difficulty of drugs. But even little things that he talked about, like he spoke about there was police who had raised issues with safety concerns walking back to their cars at night because the car park which surrounded the building was like not protected, not very well lit, etc., etc. And so his first thing to like start building trust is like, he built the fence. It was like a nothing thing that like should have been done over and over and over again. And sort of like looking at, how we build trust and things like that with those that we work with. And it is that like, and again, Brene Brown, it's like that actively listening and demonstrating. And it's like, I hear you, right? Like I hear what you're saying and I'm here to help. And it's small and it takes a long time. I think was it Ford as well, where he was saying all the reporting directors to the board were just saying everything's good. And he's like, but we're losing money. Yeah, how is everything good? And it takes like 8 months for someone to say, oh, actually, I need help, because that culture had been like, if there's a problem, it's your fault and you're going to be, in trouble for that. So yeah, I love the analogies and the examples that Simon Sinek use. And this is like typical me, like Mags is like, give me one quote, and I'm about to touch on like the fourth part of the book that I really enjoyed. But when they're talking about during the Second World War, the seed bank that they had in Russia, and how much those scientists like bought into what they were doing, is that they all died of starvation, surrounded by like tons and tons of food, because they just refused. Like they saw what they were doing with that as a way to like have the human species live on, that they wouldn't even eat in a situation where the whole town kind of starved to death. It's pretty incredible what you can inspire, right?
Mm-hmm. Jess, what was your favorite part or quote?
So one of my favorite quotes that I wrote down was, the best leaders and the best companies prioritize people before numbers. And then he kind of continues to go on that, I guess, in a business setting, leaders seem to believe that there must be a separation between personal and professional, which I guess depends on the industry you might be in. But for something like ourselves and MTMM, and keeping that small family vibes, we very much mishmash those feelings and open space and vulnerability and things like that. And I guess it made me kind of reflect back on previous places I've worked where I was actually criticized for being too personal with clients as a trainer. And I was always so confused because I was like, personal training, like I don't understand like the words in there. And it took me until starting my own business to realize that like actually like that's who I am, and that's how I lead and teach and present, and my personality. And so I think like I can't remember, I think it was in the last book or others, like you should never be surprised by people, like if people want to quit, like you need to have like those kind of like relationships with people throughout your business or in your team, for example. Like not that you always have to know everything going on, but it just really reiterated like I guess it's people first. We're a people first industry, whether it's with your clients or with your team or your partners or whatever. And if you don't have those really good relationships, then things just can't grow and continue to thrive like they should. And so, yeah, I really, again, liked that signaling to be like, cool, doing what you should be doing, really reiterating that, I guess, I think you, like us and you guys, are trying to change the industry and the standards and up the standards, because I think the system needs to be upgraded. And I just think it's great that now, like talking about feelings and creating space and vulnerability and, it's all these things are kind of like buzzwords now, and people want to talk and want to be open and want to feel comfortable to share their feelings. And the fact that I guess we're creating space for that is the best. So that whole thing I was just like thriving on. So that was one of my favorite parts of the book anyways.
Yeah. And that's one piece of how we can make that change, right? Make that change in the industries that we are in, and hopefully the, society at large one day. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
All those things.
Need more people to join the book club, Mags.
Yeah. Step one. My favorite quote and kind of concept of the book was when he was talking about stability versus resilience. So the quote was, finite-minded companies aim for stability and the ability to weather storms. Infinite-minded companies aim not just to weather storms, but to be made stronger by them. They are resilient rather than merely stable. And I think a huge example of this is, this past year. We had no idea what was coming for us and how it was going to impact our specific company at all, from a business perspective, but also from just a personal fitness, health, mental, whatever it may be, perspective as well. We don't want to just, get through COVID and, get to the other side of all of this, but we want to come out the other end stronger. We want to be able to take something away from it. And this is a concept that Ben and I talked about way back last March, I guess, when we first had a few coaches chats about the lockdowns. It's like, okay, what can you focus on to make sure that you do come out the other side stronger, better, with more knowledge or whatever it may be. But then there's the flip side of that, to not put too much pressure on yourself to do so as well. And I think too, just in general, fitness. It's, you know, if you have an injury or you have a setback of some kind, like coming out on the other side stronger so that you can, you know, move forward even further than you would have if you didn't experience that challenge, obstacle, whatever it may be. And from like a personal example, I had a back injury situation a couple of years back. And at the time, you know, you feel like you're just totally set back and, you know, there's nothing you can do about it and you're just taking 10 steps backwards. But now that I'm on the other side of it, you know, I didn't just get through that, but now I've come out and realized so much more about myself, about my body, about what it is I want to do for fitness, what I enjoy, all of that sort of thing too. So yeah, that was my favorite part of the book that spoke to me, I think, in multiple different ways too.
Love it.
Yeah.
I liked in that part too, how he brought up a lot of the different companies and how over kind of different change impacts they've innovated. And he gives the example of Garmin, like the GPS company, and how they didn't innovate and kind of take that opportunity. And I think to your point, like when we go through personal kind of struggles, like things like COVID and stuff, where you're not sure how you're going to go through it, the more creative and innovative you can be, you can kind of come out, to your point, like even better on the other side of it.
Yeah. Well, businesses have been so creative and innovative during this past year, like moving things online, like different things restaurants are doing. It's been really amazing to see. And I think it's opened our eyes to how many more opportunities there are out there, right? To reach more people. Not something that MTMM necessarily experienced firsthand because we were already all online, but we saw a lot of our, you know, partner gyms and everything like that move online and, you know, weather that storm and come out.
I guess it gave us an opportunity to kind of help with that though, right? Because we had the experience of doing that. So that kind of put us in a position that was like, oh, like offering resources as opposed to just coaching is not something we'd ever really considered, but hey, this is what's kind of needed. Right? Mm-hmm. The one quote that I had written down was that leaders aren't responsible for the results. They're responsible for the people who are responsible for the results. And I thought that was really cool too, because I think that often what we see typically is that the person who is the team leader or the manager is simply just the person that's been in the role the longest or has the most working knowledge of the specifics of the role that are required for that team. And I've worked in those teams firsthand, and they are not high performing teams because the person that is leading isn't leading. They're just doing their job and that's all they know how to do. And they might be great at that job, but there's so much more that goes into, like we've spoken about, like developing trust and relations with everyone else in that team. That is a skill set in its own right that you don't necessarily, like it's very hard to have specific metrics for leadership, right? And maybe that's going to change as we get into more asking people how much they trust or feel secure in their role or what they feel about asking questions and providing feedback. But definitely at the moment, I feel that, yeah, there's a difference between someone that leads a group of people and someone that is like a manager or like it's more than just a title, right? So I had this interesting quote the other day, Mags, and just when you guys were talking about COVID, I was starting to think about the Stockdale Paradox a little bit more, which is like not necessarily knowing how you're going to make it through something, but just having faith that you will, right? And it was like, if you pray for courage, you don't just become courageous. You are presented with opportunities in which to be courageous, right? Or if you say that, like, you know, family is like your biggest thing, you're not just given a family, you're presented with opportunities to prove that, right? Like things come towards us that give us an opportunity to grow into the people we want to be, rather than just kind of being handed the kind of attributes that we feel that we want. And so I think that Mag's kind of going back, you know, looking at that whole COVID situation in the year, like what an opportunity that was for everyone to be like, okay, what do we make of this? And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to learn 6 languages, cook 8 sourdoughs and read 1,000 books, right? But it is an opportunity to reflect and say, how do I handle, you know, like unfamiliarity and an infinite timeline? Because it's not like a 2-week thing, like who knows? And you know, how do I stack up against like who I think I am and what I'm actually displaying? It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Irrelevant, but very interesting.
I like the part as well about like when he was talking about CVS and Walgreens and selling cigarettes and how their mission statements, I think mission statements are saying like, oh, we're all about the health and well-being. But was it CVS that ended up taking cigarettes out? Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I just thought I was like, ooh, I was like, good one. You know, like you talked about, we all do it. Like you make small little decisions that are maybe outside of your normal values. But I was like, it was just super interesting. I was like, oh man, I was like, that's awesome. You know, I was like, great. Like I would never look up the mission statement of CVS or Walgreens or anything, but to actually dive in and look at it and then go, oh, we're all about health and well-being, but here's some cigarettes and enjoy, you know, like not living your best life. I found that kind of, that was just kind of quite inspiring for CVS to actually take them out of their stores, which is a big move, like a really big move.
And they were saying too that it hurt their bottom line initially, like because of the lack of sales, but then in the end, they ended up making up for it and then some, because they made a lot of new partnerships and got a lot more respect from other companies and started being able to sell new products and that sort of thing too. So I really like that case study.
I feel like that's everywhere you look, right? Like you see community clubs and things like that talk about, you know, building stronger communities and looking after their members. And then it's like, there's like poker machines and stuff, right? And it's kind of like, you feel this like nagging, like, I'm not sure that is like aligned with what you're pretending to stand for. And ultimately, like, why have a mission statement, you know? I even think the same, you know, obviously the school that I went to has been in the news a lot lately, and there's been some like not great things coming out. But even little things like at schools, like if you're putting forward this, like, you know, the health of our students is paramount and we want them to grow into be like these individuals that are leaders in the community. But then like you have a canteen that's selling like Coke and shit food and stuff like that. It's like, it's kind of like do you though? Like, do you think that's interesting? You know, like I think that's everywhere. I think that's everywhere. So yeah.
And I feel like being an employee of a company that then stands up for their mission and values, like I know what our company's is, and I've seen them do a lot of things that don't align, and it gives like it doesn't motivate you, right? Like seeing, and I guess this kind of goes back to the beginning of the book when he talks about having your why. Like it was kind of a moment for me where it clicked of like why I'm more inspired to do certain things is because there is that underlying why and how much that drives. And when you see a company, I think, stand up for its why and that just cause, I think that is like really impactful to both the community and like their employees and like their workforce.
It feels slimy, don't you think, when it comes from corporate, like CSR, like corporate social responsibility? It's like, even though it's a good thing that they're doing it, I'm always like so skeptical of like why they're doing it, you know? And it's like, oh, you want the image to portray that you're like doing this, but really, like, do you give a fuck? I don't know. I don't think so.
It's definitely worse if like you have the mission statement or, you know, the CSR or whatever it is, and then your actions don't align, rather than just not having that mission statement at all. I think you kind of touched on that, Ben. It's like, why even have it? Because I think when it doesn't align, that's much worse than just not being this like ideal image, I guess, in my mind anyway.
Yeah. He did talk a lot about that kind of the idea of what companies should be, and used a few different theories. I can't remember the name of the theory that he was talking about, but it was like, well, essentially if your like value is to, or if your goal is to return value to shareholders, like your ethics are always going to come second to that, you know? So yeah, which if you're a public traded company, you're owned by shareholders. So yeah, makes it difficult.
Well, we're running out of time here on the Zoom recording, so I guess that's a good hint that we've been chatting for more than 10 minutes. Anybody have any closing remarks, last thoughts, big takeaways that they want to share with whoever's listening?
I have a recommendation for the next book.
Ooh.
Yeah. It's a bit controversial. I just started reading Your Body Is Not an Apology. After listening to, her name's Sonia, she was actually interviewed on Brene Brown's podcast. Go figure, tie it back in. But it's pulling up a lot of old triggering things for myself, but also pissing me off in the same sentence. So as in like talking about where body shaming comes from. So I'm like thinking about when I was kind of a huskier young little kid, and then also part of like the fat liberationists books as well. So it's very interesting. So if we want to, might be able to, it might be just be some deepness. We might cry. There might be some tears. But that's my recommendation for the night. I think as like you guys who deal with food and diet, and myself more so on the training side, but it's kind of all connected. And obviously, Laura, you are just an awesome third party view on training and things. But like it's pretty relevant to the culture and the climate, the current climate we're in, worldwide. So
I like it. I like the sounds of it.
Laura's actually officially MTMM now. Jess.
Oh, great. Yeah. Grass. Yay. Yeah. Anyways, that's my final thought.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll put up a poll right after this. Or I guess I'll ask for recommendations first and then make a poll for the next book. So that'll be exciting.
Are we any of the books that aren't making the cut getting kind of like re-added into the vote, or is it just like that one didn't make it, go by the wayside?
So that's what I was thinking, is we could take this one, Jess, Your Body's Not an Apology, and then some of the old ones, and I'll just make a poll. Objections?
I like it.
Okay. Until we run out of ones that have been neglected, and then
there's no shortage of books out there, so
I really want to do the Obama one, but I feel like we need like a 3-month lead time to give everyone like enough time to get through it.
We'd have to do that over 2 months. I feel like we'd have to do that over 2 months, like
yeah.
And we'd have to have like 4 Zoom sessions. There's so much going on. You'd have so many quotes, Ben. It would just be, we'd have to have 40 minutes, the whole thing.
Classic. Well, yeah, thank you, Ben, for recommending this one. I really enjoyed it.
Same.
And I can already feel it having some really positive impacts on me personally and our company. Which is awesome. Woo.
Great.
All right. Well, I guess, that's it for this recap, but I'm looking forward to the next one. Once we figure out what book it's going to be. So stay tuned in the...
I was like, it's time again. I was like, it's book club time. I was like, amazing.
I know, it went by so fast.
Well, it's the last Thursday, right? And I think the end of the month is Wednesday next week. So it's only 3 weeks this month.
Right.
Yeah.
So have a longer time for the next one, but we'll make sure we choose it ASAP so we can get going on that.
Perfect.
Great.
Thanks, gang.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, team.
Bye.